Hello, and welcome to the Idle Actor Cold Reads series. My name is Adam, the actor with more time than talent. And in this cold read series, I'll be reading monologues from lesser known writers so that they can get a sense of what it is like to actually hear their work read out loud by an actor of middling talent. To emulate a table read or audition, the first thing I'll do is take a minute to read for the first time the piece in front of me. Then I'm going to give a first performance based on that 1 minute quiet read. Then I'm going to do some analysis, and which I will do in front of you, taking you along for the ride, telling you what I'm getting from the piece. And then after I've done that analysis, hopefully I've uncovered something new about the piece that I can add to a second read that I will then give. I should start out by saying that this piece is by my friend Bob Laine. If you've been in the New York City indie theater scene in the last 20 years, you've probably seen him or he's probably seen you. He is constantly doing theater, and when he's not in a show, he's seeing the shows. He's really good like that. Actors can be a little self-centered, but Bob goes out of his way to see everyone's pieces, and that's kind of beautiful. He's like the little heart of New York City indie theater. He is an actor and a poet, and I believe he sent me one of his poems that reads like a monologue. All right, let's go. Okay, here we. Warning ahead of time. I'm probably gonna mispronounce some of these words. Sorry. We were only boys, and they were too. We were Americans, they were Japanese. There were two of us, there were six of them. They saw us, we saw them. We ran, they chased. We were only boys. We were just brothers finding fun on a Sunday. It was 1970 in Misawa, Japan. We were old enough to know the locals could be hostile, but too young to know why. In Japanese culture class, we folded colored squares while they taught us the words for good morning and thank you. Ohayo gozaimasu, we would say to our paper swans. Domo arigato. Our origami frogs would croak back our fragile menagerie, spoke to us in bright colors and perfect creases. They, like us, knew nothing about mushroom clouds and nuclear fallout. The assimilation curriculum did not include a module on reasons why the indigenous population might hate you. So, we were confused at the scowls we sometimes got in the local shops and from the passers-by in the street. I thought maybe they just didn't like kids. I mean, I'd met adults like that, but why would the kids hate us too? Then I thought maybe it was my handicapped brother they didn't like. I'd met kids and adults like that too. And I was always ready to fight anyone who tried to mess with my brother. Unless, of course, there was six of them. In that case, I ran. We were only boys, and they were too. My brother and I ran, and the six Japanese boys did too. We cut through backyards, they followed. We dodged rock gardens and kiddie pools, they hurdled them. We squeezed ourselves under a fence, they scaled it. When we reached the far side of a large baseball park, it looked like we were running out of options when I realized, in slow motion horror, that it was no longer we. It was just me. My brother had plopped down midfield, bawling and screaming like he was the devil's baby and the Japanese boys were closing in. It's a moment of time that's frozen in my memory. That jarring feeling that I'd failed my brother, that I'd abandoned him, that I was powerless to protect him. That feeling would never leave me. I would remember that feeling the day I left for college, knowing I'd never live in the same city or house with my brother again. That feeling would come back every time I returned home from another too short family visit. And even now, 40 years later, when my brother's annual 4-month stay with me ends and I take him to the airport to send him back home to my sister and parents, I'll sit at the gate looking out the window as his plane taxis away, and the memory of that Sunday will return. Even 5 minutes after the plane's taken off, I will still be sitting there, seeing the impossible length of a field between us, feeling I'm as powerless now as I was then. In Misawa, Japan in 1970, the 6 Japanese boys never touched my brother. For reasons unknown, they accepted his ear-piercing surrender, passed him by, chased me down, and beat the living shit out of me. We were only boys. Okay. Now for some analysis. I know for a fact that this is... I don't know for a fact. I am 99% sure this is autobiographical from Bob Laine. But putting aside what I know of Bob Laine, what's in the script here? 1970, they were in Japan. I'm guessing military brats. In the story, the younger brothers are confused about why the locals don't like them, but the narrator, with the gift of 2020 hindsight, is able to understand why the indigenous population didn't like him. The shadow of the nuclear bombs dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima loom large in the narrative of his childhood. There is a lot of setting of place with details, which makes me think in the moment that the narrator is really connecting with these memories. This is even recounting it as a sensorious experience for the narrator. As an actor, here's a structural thing that I would analyze. Most of this is a mislead. Like what he's talking about here is this memory of this moment, how it keeps coming back to him as an adult. And when you hear this story and you get to the point where his brother has plopped down in the middle of the field and he's ran way past and it's too far to get back to him and he feels like he abandoned his brother, he then goes down this side path in the narrative where he talks about recalling these moments, and you think, and maybe the author is a little bit talking about him failing his brother in some way, and this memory always comes back to him when he thinks he's failing his brother. But the thing to note as an actor, as far as structure goes, is that this is a mislead, at least a little bit, because while he did accidentally abandon his brother ends up being okay, and he gets the crap kicked out of him. And it's kind of a brilliant mislead. It subverts all the real tenderness that is obviously in there with a little bit of dark cynicism. I'm glad I read this ahead of time so I could... I'm not making this channel for actors, but actors, if you ever get into a audition room or a table read, even if they don't give you time to look at the script, try to look at the script as much as possible. If you get it in your hand and you even have 10 seconds before you start, even as you're introducing yourself, understanding the structure of what's going on in the script can really help you read. I think I was probably reading it a bit too much like a poem to start, because I know this is probably one of Bob's poems that he sent as a monologue. I'm going to try to read it more like a character and in character. My preconceived notions are probably something I carried with me into the reading of this script. I realized that at some point while reading it. Okay, let's try a second read. We were only boys, and they were too. We were Americans, they were Japanese. There was 2 of us, there was 6 of them. They saw us, we saw them. We ran, they chased. We were only boys. We were just Brothers Finding Fun on a Sunday. It was 1970 in Misawa, Japan. We were old enough to know the locals could be hostile, but too young to know why. In Japanese culture class, we folded colored squares while they taught us the words for good morning and thank you. Ohayo gozaimasu. We would say to our paper swans, domo arigato. Our origami frogs would croak back. Our fragile menagerie spoke to us in bright colors and perfect creases. They, like us, knew nothing about mushroom clouds and nuclear fallout. The assimilation curriculum did not include a module on reasons why the indigenous population might hate you. So, we were confused at the scowls we sometimes got in the local shops and from passers-by in the street. I thought maybe they just didn't like kids. I'd met adults like that. But why did the kids hate us too? Then I thought maybe it was my handicapped brother they didn't like. I'd met kids and adults like that too. And I was always ready to fight anyone who tried to mess with my brother. I mean, unless, of course, there were 6 of them. In that case, I ran. We were only boys. And they were too. My brother and I ran, and the 6 Japanese boys did too. We cut through backyards, they followed. We dodged rock gardens and kiddie pools, they hurdled them. We squeezed ourselves under a fence, and they scaled it. When we reached the far side of a large baseball field, it looked like we were running out of options when I realized in slow motion horror that it was no longer we. It was just me. My brother had plopped down midfield, bawling and screaming like he was the devil's baby and the Japanese boys were closing in. It's a moment of time that's frozen in my memory. That jarring feeling that I'd failed my brother, that I'd abandoned him, that I was powerless to protect him. That feeling had never leave me. I remember that feeling the day I left for college, knowing I would never live in the same city or house as my brother again. That feeling would come back every time I returned home from another too short family visit, and even now, 40 years later, when my brother's annual 4-month stay with me ends and I take him to the airport to send him back home to my sister and parents, I'll sit at the gate looking out the window as his plane taxis away. And the memory of that Sunday will return. Even 5 minutes after his plane is taken off, I'll still be sitting there, seeing the impossible length of field between us, feeling I'm as powerless now as I was then. In Misawa, Japan in 1970. The 6 Japanese boys never touched my brother. For reasons unknown, they accepted his ear-piercing surrender, passing him by, chased me down, and beat the living shit out of me. We were only boys. Okay. Bob has given me generous permission to critique his work, although I imagine it's going to be a little hard. I will say, as a poem, it's kind of fantastic. You could hear the rhythms and repetitions throughout. We were only boys, and they were too. There was the we were Americans, they were Japanese in that first part, and then my brother and I ran. The Japanese boys did too. We cut through backyards. They followed. There's all this back and forth, two sides of the tale thing. There's a nice symmetry in the writing too, where he's telling two sides of a story. So he's telling two sides explicitly in the narrative. We were only boys, and they were too. But he's also talking about his perspective being a young American child in Japan, and now as an adult gaining perspective on what life was like for them and what their intentions really were and why there was hostility. So he's telling two sides, both in the structure of the piece and also in the narrative of the piece, and I think that's really clever. I would say if you're looking in on this and you're worried that a poem can't be a monologue, or you're worried about monologues not sounding like poems, I'd say it really depends on the piece you're in, and you should open up your brain a little bit. Read some stuff with hard language. Read poems. Because poetry has to be so efficient in its language, the visuals are so rich, textural, sumptuous. You can just absolutely eat those words. They evoke things very clearly. Read Rudyard Kipling and Edna St. Vincent Millay and Walt Whitman and half a dozen other poems. A.E. Housman, C.S. Lewis. They're just the Jabberwock poem by C.S. Lewis, by the way. So many other fantasy references come from that poem. So if you're a big fantasy nerd, read that poem. You'll suddenly know where the Vorpal sword came from. I will say, if you're reading it as a monologue, some of the poetic language does get in the way. The symmetry that seems clever as a poem can feel a little awkward as a monologue. It doesn't feel quite like he's talking to someone. It feels like he's talking directly to the audience, which, again, depending on your piece, might be a thing that works. I think it's a brilliant little poem. I love the visuals. I love that the structure is mirrored, or rather, I love that the structure is mirroring the content of the poem, and I love that there's that little subversion at the end. It's fun. If I were critiquing it as a writer, I might say some of the language is clunky, but as an actor, I actually kind of really like awkward language, especially if it's descriptive or beautiful. Uh, Challenging language makes you work for it. I kind of love it, but it might throw off the rhythm of a piece that's supposed to be more realistic. Yeah, I love this piece. Thanks for sending it in, Bob. So, if you would like me to read your script, first, subscribe. I know, everyone begs for it. It's terrible. I don't much like it either, but if I say the word subscribe, it reminds you to do it if you were thinking about it anyway. So I gotta do the thing. It's dumb. I have one job on this ship. It's stupid. All right. Anyway, yeah, subscribe and then email idleactor@gmail.com. Give me a PDF of your script in either screenplay or play format. It is, I do this because it is, the reason we have playwriting and screenplay format is big, long paragraphs of text stretching all the way across the page are very hard to read externally. You need break points to be able to get the words out of your mouth. Try it for yourself. I'm telling you. I don't know why I'm telling you. I don't know. Writers, you should try to at least experiment what it is like to be an actor once in a while. It'll help you. Yeah, anyway, tell me any socials or contact info or work you want to promote in your email, and let me know if it is okay to critique your piece. Sort of a carrot and stick on this is I won't compliment your piece if I'm not also allowed to critique it a little bit. Generally, I think it's good for all artists to take a knock every once in a while. It'll make you better, even if that opinion is wrong. Absorb it. They are your audience. Your audience is always at least a little right. But thanks for tuning in. 1970 Misawa, Japan. Oh, I'm not. I'm going to stop and I'm going to actually look up these words. Stupid American tongue. I got options here.
ありがとうございます。
Domo arigato, I already knew. Thank you, Sticks.
Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto.
Leave it running or stop it? Stop it.